Namaskara. Good evening. The future of education and drawing inspiration from the past of India. Essentially, this topic, though exciting, actually started off with a very painful episode, a couple of episodes. A few months ago, and COVID, like all of us know, and what it has done to all of us, and what it is continuing to do to all of us. In the district of Mysuru, and all of us who are local would possibly remember it as a small little news item somewhere. But when you actually know it as a real life episode that happened to somebody you know, a very young 14-year-old child studying in a government school a little far away from the city of Mysuru, one morning decided to commit suicide. And she took her life. And the only reason she gave, our family told us later, was this child was asking for a smartphone because the teacher said the government has started schools online now and you need a smartphone to follow the lessons. And this child wanted to be in school and wanted to be part of the education system as we know it. And her parents were agriculture laborers, coolies, as we know. And parents couldn't afford the smartphone, and this child decided she couldn't take the embarrassment of going to school without, or continuing her classes online without the smartphone, and not being able to convince her parents to borrow money. She decided she was a problem for the family and committed suicide. I tell this to remind ourselves how we have all linked the downloading of information to the very understanding of education. And a few months later, fast forwarding 3-4 months, not too far off, I was engaging or interacting with a set of young people from across this country whom we considered the best and most brilliant young people. And I was asking them, what did COVID do to them? And these are all young people who just graduated from their undergrad degrees and just looking for life as we know it. And the biggest problem, they said, was not about wanting to wear a mask, not about the problem of washing hands regularly, but the fact that all of them suffered from problems related to mental health. And this, we must remember, in a time when close to 1 million young children between 18 and 25, every year around the world commit suicide. And these are young kids telling us, or at least trying to tell us, that they're all having problems of mental health. And I was trying to dig a little deeper. And when I asked them the question, why? Why is it that you're all under stress? This is a great time to be at home, to enjoy life as we all know it. And most of them said that they can't stand the stress. Sometimes not having a social network of our own in the real physical form, despite all the Facebooks and Twitters and all the social media as we know it, can take a toll. And the stress was not because of not partying or not going out or not watching a movie. The stress, as most of them articulated, was the fact that for the first time in their lives, they felt completely insecure and uncertain about what the future held for them. They were troubled that jobs, as we know them today, may not exist for the skill sets that they have, and the skill sets that they have may not get them the jobs of tomorrow at all. And so on one end of the spectrum, we have an education system where a child takes away its life because it can't participate in the mainstream system, which is now technologically driven. On the other end, despite acquiring degrees of university education that we can provide, they find themselves inadequate to stand up to the demands of future jobs. And this coming from a generation of people with just 9 months of COVID. And I thought this is a time when we need to really think hard and ask ourselves, what kind of an education can we contemplate for the future? And I found in my own little work, especially in the research related to human development, that India's educational system, without romanticizing our past, without getting back into saying that everything about the past was great in our country, but let's look at all the things that were actually great in our country. And education, I believe, was some very strong element which we have all decided to ignore for a long time. And in the last 400 years, have lost the beauty and the insights and the wealth that our traditional systems provided us. And I'm talking before 1600, during the time when today's entire scientific foundation, today's entire scientific or STEM applications of science as we know it, is all fundamentally driven by the work and the scientific attainments of India's past. Whether it is the pi, whether it's calculus, algebra, the binary system, metallurgy or chemical engineering or a knowledge as we all know it today, which we use in everyday life without even thinking about it or where it came from. All this came from work that was done by our past. And that we need to really step back and understand what was it in our past that we could actually look back into. Because we can never really build a future without having the patience to understand and study the past. And some time spent on that will be actually worth it. What were we talking about? It's very easy to call everything Gurukula was great. But very few people try to deconstruct what was actually happening those times. And I would like to bring it out in 5 dimensions. The first dimension is just looking at the child or the student, as we call him. The word student itself is a fundamentally flawed understanding of what the child in a Gurukula went through. But for want of a better word, let me call him the student or the thought. Second, the people who actually enable the child to learn is what the word I would use. And that's what the guru means. A guru was not a teacher as we traditionally understand it. A guru was something more than that, a mentor, a provider. At the same time, somebody who would allow you to have an immersive experience, make those mistakes that you need to make to understand life, and then facilitate learning in an ecosystem which was not threatening. And there's so many things that go into the word guru which we fundamentally misunderstand today. Understanding a little bit about him, going behind, scratch a little deeper. The third element or domain I would like to share with you or talk to you about is, what is the ecosystem in which all this operated? It's very easy to imagine a Gurukula in a forest setting with trees all around, birds flying away, and stuff like that as we read in our comics. But understanding Gurukulas as institutions embedded in communities in which they thrived. And that's something we don't have today. Today, a school has to look distinctly different. A school has to be a brick and mortar institution, which is standing out there, the flashy schools that we see of today. They're actually standing out in the community. They're not embedded in communities. And that's a big difference. And the third is the content which these children were learning. Content which prepared them for life. Content that didn't prepare them for jobs. So fundamental paradigm of today's education, and I've also been a product of the same education, is to look at education, whether whatever we may argue and whatever we are told and whatever stories we all hear, it is fundamentally related to employment. I can challenge very much every young man today, when he gets into a program, the first thought he gets is, what kind of a career is going to open up for me? And the first question his parents may ask is, Sambala eshtu baratte? We all talk about it. It's nice to talk about it, but the reality is education is intricately related to employment. And so we need to understand the kind of content that was there in the past, content that we're promoting today. And the last is the methodology of transaction. Now let's learn from the Gurukula, a community embedded institution as I called it, where the ecosystem facilitated learning and not teaching. A system where today we all understand that reflective learning is so critical. Well, today's education psychologists go beyond that and say just reflective learning is not enough anymore. Repetitive learning combined and coupled with reflective learning is what makes a difference. We need to remember, we need to exercise the brain, we need to have memory to be jogged all the time. And repetitive learning is as critical and as important as reflective learning. And India's Gurukula system perfected it. Modern education in India is all about repetitive learning. How well you can understand what you've learned in school or college, repeat it in examination exactly the way your teacher knows it. Not the way science teaches you, but the way teacher knows it. And then get the marks which he or she believes that you deserve. And then repeat everything out there and you're a damn good student. You're an A+ student. But that's not what education is all about. Education is the ability to not just repeat the mantra or the sloka or the subhashita that your guru taught you, but reflecting on it the whole day. It's about walking together as a community, as a group of young people, going into the forest, fetching your firewood, immersing yourself in the learning experience in a real life setting where your guru is a role model. How many teachers can actually get up and say they're role models today? They were role models in every sense of the word, where education was not driven in a hierarchically segmented platform way. It was driven in a way in which the guru had the humility to say, I don't have the answer for this. You can go somewhere else and seek answers. Where the student could come from a rich society or a poor society, where a Krishna, whom we admire as God, and Sudama, whom we see him as a pauper, could go to the same Gurukula and get the same education, where equity, justice, fairness, integrity, and transparency were not fashion statements that get made out to be today, but they were lived experiences. And that was the content we need to have, where content was not delivered just for giving you competence. Content was delivered for enabling you to understand that you are incompetent. And therefore, you have to have the ability to self-doubt yourself. Today, self-doubt is looked down upon. Those days, self-doubt was encouraged. Doubting ourselves means starting the journey of understanding what learning is all about, discovering new ways of learning, new ways of thinking. And that is what self-doubt leads to self-inquiry. And self-inquiry is possibly the highest expression of spirituality itself. And these things were all about the child, the content. And the transaction was immersive, was experiential, where the people had the time to invest on a continuum of learning under the same kind of tutelage, which led you to decide that what role you would like to perform in society. Where specialization was founded and built on the generalization that a Gurukula provided you. Where specialization was for roles, not for careers. The roles you played in society was very critical. Society needed those roles. Unfortunately, today either we glorify the Varna system or we critique it and decry it without understanding. It was the finest role separation you could see in society, driven by the competences you need to acquire in particular settings. And that happened in our ancient past. But what did all of this achieve? This all achieved what I would call today is building enormous human and social capital in our country. It built relationships. It built powerful human capital in a person. And it worked in 4 dimensions. The first dimension of human capital it built was it built a child physically. Our children today, I think recent research of yesterday or the day before yesterday brings out the fact that children getting into IITs have no childhood. You can't even call them children anymore. But these are people who invested physically. They learned yoga as much as they learned the correct food to eat. They understood the slokas as much as ahara tattva. They understood Ayurveda as a way of life rather than just as staying healthy. And then the cognitive abilities. Content was provided. Content is important, but not information which undigested runs riot in your brains, but information which is not acquired to just look at degrees and say, I went to the best schools in the world. It's not for personal aggrandizement, but for public application. And that was a big difference. And the third development was emotional. How many of us even understand interpersonal intelligence, intrapersonal intelligence? We celebrate the theories of Gardner and say multiple intelligences. They were embedded in the way Indian education grew and flourished, and that's what we need to bring back. We need to bring back the child's ability to manage itself and manage people around it. To understand control of internal nature is as important and as necessary as control of external nature. Growing science outside is irrelevant if you don't grow the science of your insights. And that's what Indian education did. And finally, looking at spirituality as part of integral to this domain. So physical, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual growth was what education was all about. And you did this in a society which flourished because social networking, social collectivization, and social capital was as integral to this. Incidentally, this produced powerful economic consequences. And going back to this lesson that India provides, the proof of the pudding was these 1600 years, if we can calculate from 0 AD, that's where we have enough data to talk about. Till 1600 AD, we were the world's largest economy. The beauty of this is we never had education to grow the economy. We just had education to grow people. We were making Indians first, they made India later. And what we did not realize was building their human and social capital resulted in the finest economic consequence. We had the world's largest GDP at all. And look at what happened after that. When we got macularized, when we started producing a conveyor belt system of clerks for the British Empire, we lost not just the Indianness, but we lost Indian education itself. So finally, to conclude, can we take out lessons from this past? Can we repackage them, not just fashion statements, but actually as experiences which every child can go through? Can we prepare them for the jobs of the future? Can we teach our children the ability to learn, adapt, and experience, and be ready for any kind of a new challenge that is thrown at them? If you build their capital, I'm sure whatever the future is going to be, however challenging it's going to be, however demanding and vulnerable it's going to make humankind, we'll have a generation of young people who will lead us out of all this. They'll be the ones who will take light to the darkness called sometimes difficult situations like COVID. Thank you.